Welcome to Season 3 of Writing in the Tiny House. We spent Seasons 1 and 2 building an entire library of episodes that you can reference regarding tips and tricks and advice on how to write fiction. For Season 3, we are taking a different approach. We are rolling up our sleeves and we are diving into short stories that have been in the public domain as a way to demonstrate what this entire process can look like. For Season 3, we are doing collections of episodes all regarding one short story, including a reading that I will be doing for you, and then a few more episodes after that where we have a guest and we discuss the various different things about that short story that work and may not work, so that you can learn what to look for in your own writing to become a better writer. Thank you for tuning in to this week's episode of Writing in the Tiny House. Welcome to the discussion episodes of this series on Agatha Christie's The Plymouth Express Affair. A reading of this short story is Season 3, Episode 2, so be sure not to miss that. I am Devin Davis, I am the host of this show, and I am also a fantasy author. And I am here with Chrissy Barton, who will be joining me throughout this series.
Hey there, I'm Chrissy Barton. I'm a certified copy editor and owner of Little Syllables Editing, and you can find me at littlesyllables.com. While Devin and I share a love of literature, I think you deserve to know that we are also lifelong friends.
So welcome aboard this in-depth analysis of Agatha Christie's The Plymouth Express Affair. This discussion is about to leave the station. Hello and welcome back to the final installment, the final episode of the discussion of The Plymouth Express Affair by Agatha Christie. I have Chrissy Barton here with me. Chrissy, are you there?
Hello.
I know.
Yes.
I don't think that our listeners are ever going to figure out that we just recorded 4 episodes in one phone call.
Well, now you told them.
Right? It's a trick that they would never have figured out.
Uh-huh.
So we have discussed at length many different things with this short story, just as a way to demonstrate some of the cool literary tips and tricks and some things to avoid, going through what Agatha Christie has done with this. And just with this final episode, I wanted to talk about contemporary fiction and kind of what that is. So contemporary fiction is fiction that takes place in the time and place that the author is living. And so if I were to write some contemporary fiction, it would take place in northern Utah or someplace where I'm familiar. But it would take place pretty close to 2023. And it would be considered contemporary fiction. When we talk about contemporary fiction and when we talk about short stories, a lot of short stories, especially the standalone short stories, are contemporary fiction just because if we're writing in a current time and place, there are already some things that the reader understands about the setting. And so we don't have to describe that setting as much as if we were writing, if it were me writing a novel that takes place in 1920, that would be historical fiction, and I would have to be more sensitive about what I was describing because things have changed since then. And so it's just important to know as we go through this short story by Agatha Christie, and if you want to, again, listen to the reading that I prepared for you guys in episode 2 of season 3, it's important to know that Agatha Christie was writing contemporary fiction when she wrote these things. And so this short story is contemporary fiction in 1924 when it was published. That means that for her readership, the city of London and many of these other cities, like they already knew what the city looked like. And so Agatha Christie did not have to go into depth to describe it. This story takes place on a passenger train, which in America, we don't really we don't really do that as much. But in London, trains are all over London and Europe still, but a train in 1924 was something that everybody going anywhere was like, they knew what that was. They knew what to expect when you were talking about a passenger train. And so Agatha Christie did not have to go into depth describing the train because everybody already knew it. That's why in this short story, a lot of the setting is not present. But then we fast forward almost 100 years to like stupid me who has never read Agatha Christie before. I mean, I've read a lot of books, but I'm going to like let everybody know that I have read a lot of fantasy books. As far as classical literature goes, like I haven't, like I'm not well versed, and fantasy is a pretty new genre, and it's been a lot of fantasy. And so even though I love whodunits, I have not read Agatha Christie before.
You got to read some more of it.
I know, I really do. Like,
do.
especially diving into this and doing some research like we've done in preparation for these podcast episodes. I definitely want to, but yeah, so I go through and I read this and there is a lack of setting and I get mad about it. But then I remember, oh, this is contemporary fiction of the 1920s and she didn't need to include as much just because it was commonplace for everybody.
And I think that applies to not only the time, but also the place, like you mentioned. So like they would understand her intended readership would understand the geography. They would understand what the train looks like. They would understand things like leaving your luggage in a luggage room while you have tea, you know, like
exactly. Yeah.
They'd probably also understand the timelines better than we would.
Yeah, like how much time it would take to get from here to there.
Right.
On a train.
Right. Yeah.
And so, like, all of that is well and good. However, there are plenty of things in this story where some description would have been great. And one of the things that comes to mind is the very first. So there's the hook that takes place on the train that we have already expressed that Chrissy and I have just loved. The hook is great. However, after the hook, we see Poirot talking to Hastings and they're reading the newspaper. And that's kind of all that you know as far as where they are.
There's a table. There's a table.
Right? So they're in a place where there is a table.
And a newspaper.
And a newspaper.
Yeah. It doesn't describe it at all. And then the next scene, they go to Mr. Halliday's house. It does tell us that's a superb house.
It does say superb house in Park Lane. And if you are a Londoner, you probably know what a house on Park Lane would look like. But at the same time, it'd be nice to know which house or whatever.
Right. Yeah. It seems like that must be important, but
right. And it's a big enough house to have its own library.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, they go and they speak to Mr. Halliday, and Mr. Halliday gives his, feelingless police report on the murder of his child. And then
the day before,
which happened just the day before, or maybe like 2 days ago. I don't know. But then he says, like, do you want to meet with the maid? And poof, the maid is there.
Right. He rang a bell.
I mean, he rang, like, I know he did that, and then poof, the maid was there. They're in the library. Who knows if they spoke to the maid in the library? I mean, the maid goes by Jane Mason. We know that she's actually Gracie, someone else. But anyway, maybe she came to the library. She probably did. It's also possible that they went to a different room to meet her, or maybe gone outside to meet her. Like, who knows? Like, there could have been a lot of really interesting places in this house alone that would have made the story itself flow a little bit differently and caught my attention more. Just because, I mean, even though some of the big things we can we can say, oh, it's contemporary fiction. We don't need the description as much as far as like what London looks like or what the train actually looked like. If you don't give any description at all as to what the setting is, it's called white room syndrome. And it can really mess with the reader's sense of space and the relationship, like and how the characters interact with their environment.
Right. It seems like they're like not, I mean, it seems like they're not really interacting besides just talking to each other. I mean, when you're in a room with somebody and you're having a conversation, you move around, I don't know, you might even touch a person, but in this one, I don't think anybody touches anybody in this story.
No, it is just
They,
standing, and like who knows
and
if they're even facing each other. Like
right, they hand some things to each other occasionally.
right,
But
that's true.
yeah,
But like there's
yeah.
no description of a desk, like there's no description of the library itself. And granted, it's a short
Hmm.
story and she likely had a word count limit to this, so who
Yeah.
knows? But yeah, I mean
Maybe she cut
those,
all that out.
or maybe her editor did. But yeah, like wandering through a library, what is Poirot actually looking at? Or what is anybody, like, is he not looking at anything at all? And that's still interesting to know. Like, to be in somebody's
Yeah.
library and to not actually really see any of it is an interesting character trait if that's what he was doing.
Right.
Or to see the maid in her work environment.
Mhm.
Anything.
Right. And I think describing the setting can really add to the mood of the story as well. I mean, not even,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it also helps with characterization, but it can also help add different feelings to the story. And that is kind of lacking here. Like, there's definitely a lack of emotion in this story all around, from the characters, from the lack of setting, from everything.
Right. But like additionally, so with this, it seems that the big, I don't know, red herring or the big clue that it was the maid who was the murderer, it all came
Uh-huh.
about in a word that she said. But I think it would have been driven home a lot better and made her more of a real person if she was interacting with her environment in some way when she was kind of inadvertently spilling the beans.
Right.
I mean, having to place so much importance on the words that somebody speaks because that's all that you have is kind of
Mhm.
a big responsibility for a reader.
Right. There's no body language at all.
Hmm. Yeah, no body language, no mannerisms. Like they don't walk past each other, like they don't storm out of the room, you know, any of these things. And considering how
Right.
recently the murder happened, it seemed that there should be some of this.
Right. It seems like somebody ought to be upset.
Right? Somebody gets to be
Anybody.
mad.
Right.
And
Or I mean, you think about it, the maid, she's like a lady's maid. So she spends a lot of time with this woman. Who knows how long she's worked for her? It doesn't say. She lives in her house. She dresses her, for crying out loud.
right.
It seems like she would be a slightest bit upset or worried or traumatized by her being murdered, but no, there's nothing.
Right. And well, there's nothing. And some of that could have leaked into her environment as well. A lady's maid, like you said, they are with the person that they serve all of the day. And
Right.
that idea could have been reinforced as a way to describe her relationship to, you know, to the deceased or whatever by describing her
Hmm.
environment. I mean, maybe something was out of place, maybe she was out of sorts, you know, maybe she was late to work and this or that, like I don't know, like
Yeah.
rising late and not doing her job well or doing it slowly
Yeah.
and interacting with the different things in that way could have driven all of that home better. Like I said at the beginning of this episode, this is the final episode of this discussion series that Chrissy and I have prepared for the Plymouth Express Affair. Chrissy, all in all, if you were to give this short story a rating of 0 stars to 5 stars, what would you give this short story?
Maybe a 2.
Right. I was going to say 2 stars.
It's got a lot of potential, which I think, is probably why it ended up as a novel eventually. But it also has a lot of problems.
It does have a lot of problems. And the thing is, I said this before in a previous episode, I like that it has problems. Because sometimes it's fun. Agatha Christie, the biggest known fiction writer in history. Mm-hmm. Like, it's cool to see some of the early stuff where it started. And it's cool to see that that's how, a big fiction legend like Agatha Christie, she's been called the Queen of Crime. Mm-hmm. The Mistress of Murder. Those are really big titles. And to see that she wrote something like this that is flawed and has problems is really cool for me to know.
Yeah. Gives us all hope.
Right? It gives us all hope.
You can one day be the king of fantasy.
Right. I could be the king of fantasy, if not in just my mind. No, but and like to take this short story and to learn from it and to pick out some of the problems, I think that, if Agatha Christie were in the room with us, I don't think she'd have a problem with that.
Right.
I truly don't.
Probably not. Imagine she had a thick skin anyway.
Oh, yeah. And like a lot of opinions. I'm sure that she was that person.
Yeah.
But at the same time, like an editor and a writer learning and growing from her writing, I think she would like that. And, sharing that with her, with the listeners of this podcast, like, yeah, let's do that.
Yeah.
So 2 stars, way to go. I'm glad. I'm glad that she later, padded this out and it became a novel. I think that The Mystery of the Blue Train was published in 2008. It's number 5 of the Poirot series, but it's not yet in the public domain. So we can't just go get it for free yet. We get to wait another couple years. But yeah. Chrissy, thank you so much for being a part of these past few episodes as we've discussed this. Thank you for sharing your insight. Thank you for doing your research. I appreciate that you did that. Mm-hmm. And
yeah, it's been fun.
It's been a good time. It's been a good time recording these 4 episodes in one phone call.
Longest phone call ever.
Okay, well, we're going to go ahead and wrap it up. So thank you, our listeners, so much for joining us. With Chrissy Barton, her information is in the show notes with Little Syllables Editing. So go ahead and reach out to her if you are in the need of an editor. And as always, stay tuned for the different things that I am going to be releasing once they are ready. So thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, and we will see you next time. Have a good night, guys. And that is it for today. Thank you so much for joining us on today's episode of Writing in the Tiny House. If you are interested in supporting this show, and if you are interested in following me on social media, all of that information can be found or at least accessed in the content of the show notes of this episode. Also, for every guest that we have on Writing in the Tiny House, all of their professional information, all of their social media stuff, and the website to their business or whatever it is they do is also found in the description in the show notes. So thank you so much for tuning in for today's episode, and we hope to see you again soon.